Welcome to Nazir Fears, where fear finds you. Do you dare to enter a world of unspeakable horror and chilling mysteries? If you love creepy true stories, urban legends, haunted places, and terrifying experiences, you're in the right place. What we offer: spine-chilling horror stories, dark and mysterious urban legends, real-life encounters with the supernatural, psychological horror and unexplained mysteries, new nightmares. Every daily upload a new video only for you. Subscribe if you dare. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know what's lurking in the dark. Story 1. The Cabin That Waited. The snowstorm had already swallowed half the forest by the time Darren and his cousins reached the old cabin. Winter in Black Thorn Pines was always harsh, but that evening the woods felt unnaturally silent, as if something was holding its breath beneath the snow. The cabin appeared suddenly through the thick curtain of white, its roof sagging under the weight of fresh snowfall, windows frosted over like blind eyes, and a single lantern flickering outside, though nobody had lit it. "Did you leave that on?" Ava asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound casual. Darren shook his head slowly. "The cabin's been empty for years." They exchanged looks, but the storm behind them howled with such force that turning back wasn't an option. The wind pushed them toward the wooden porch as if urging them inside. When Darren turned the doorknob, it clicked open immediately. Unlocked. Waiting. The interior smelled of cold wood, dust, and something else. Something faint and rotten beneath the layers of winter air. "Let's get the fire going," Lucas muttered, rubbing his arms. "This place is freezing." Ava walked to the corner, brushing snow from her jacket, when she suddenly froze. "Hey, who moved the chair?" The rocking chair, old and carved from dark pine, was gently swaying back and forth, even though the door had been shut. No wind touched it, yet it rocked. Darren exhaled slowly. "Probably the storm vibrations. This place is old." But he didn't believe his own words. The fire crackled to life after a few minutes, filling the cabin with an orange glow. The storm's roar softened behind the thick log walls, and for the first time, they relaxed a little. Darren unpacked their food and blankets, Lucas checked the generator, and Ava explored the dusty hallway that led to the bedroom. "Guys," she called out after a moment, There's a smell in here." Darren followed her voice and stepped into the dark room. It was small, with a single bed and a wardrobe that leaned at a crooked angle. Snow filtered faintly through a cracked window. A smell of decay hung heavy, like frozen meat left too long in the open. Darren knelt and lifted the edge of the bed. He regretted it instantly. A face stared back at him. Frozen, pale, lips blue, eyes wide open in terror, icy lashes stuck together like needles. A man lay curled under the frame, body twisted unnaturally, as if he had tried to crawl away from something. His fingers were broken. His clothes were torn. Ava screamed. Darren stumbled backward, his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his teeth. "Lucas, get in here!" Lucas rushed over, his flashlight beam shaking. When he saw the corpse, he gagged and turned away. "What the hell happened to him?" he whispered. Ava's voice trembled. "We have to leave. Even in this storm, we can't stay with a dead body here." But the wind outside slammed into the cabin like a living beast, rattling the windows so violently the glass nearly cracked. "We'll freeze before we make it 10 feet, Darren said. "We'll wait until morning. Report it when the storm ends." But he didn't notice the frost creeping along the walls, inching toward the fireplace like veins of ice. He didn't see the footprints, bare, wet, and small, appearing behind them in the snow-dusted floorboards. He didn't feel the eyes watching from the dark corners of the cabin. The night dragged on. They sat in the living room, too scared to be alone. Darren's mind kept drifting back to the body. Why was he under the bed? What had he been trying to escape? Why were his hands broken? Around midnight, the rocking chair started moving again. Slowly, rhythmic, as if someone invisible had taken their seat. Ava clutched Darren's arm. "Please tell me you see that." "I see it," he whispered, unable to blink. Lucas raised the flashlight, and the beam caught something behind the chair. A shape, small, pale, crouching. "Who's there?" Lucas stepped forward. The shape crawled out slowly into the firelight. A little girl. Her hair frozen stiff, skin ghost pale, eyes black and glassy like wet stones. She wore a nightgown stiff with frost, and her bare feet left wet prints on the wooden floor. Ava whimpered. "Oh my God, she's freezing. She's a child." But the girl didn't shiver, didn't blink. She just stared at them with eyes filled with an old, cold hunger. Then her jaw opened, not like a child's, like a predator unhinging its mouth. A sound oozed out, wet, cracking, like ice breaking under a heavy weight. Lucas dropped the flashlight. "Nope, nope, we're leaving." He grabbed his jacket, but before he could reach the door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the cabin. All of them jumped. The little girl tilted her head. A long drip of melted frost slid down her cheek like a tear. Then she whispered, voice brittle as thin ice. "He hid under the bed, but it didn't save him." Ava's breath caught in her throat. What do you want?" The girl turned to Darren, smiling slowly, her teeth sharp like cracked ice shards. "I want company. I get lonely when the storm comes." The fire sputtered violently. Ice crawled up the walls, reaching the ceiling. Frost formed over the windows, sealing them shut. The cabin groaned under the weight of the supernatural cold. The girl suddenly lunged. Darren grabbed Ava and shoved her aside as the creature slammed him to the floor, her fingers icy enough to burn his skin. His body convulsed at the cold, seeping into his bones. Lucas shouted and swung a log from the fireplace, smashing it into the girl's back. She shrieked, a sharp, piercing sound that cracked the wooden planks beneath them. She twisted unnaturally, bones snapping backward as she turned her head full around to look at Lucas. Then she crawled toward him, fast. Lucas swung again, but she grabbed his wrist. Frost exploded over his arm instantly. His skin froze solid. His scream filled the cabin as his arm shattered like glass, ice slicing the air. He fell, blood steaming as it hit the freezing floor. Ava sobbed, covering her mouth. Darren dragged Lucas away, but the girl was already crawling on the walls, upside down, her limbs bending backward like broken branches. "Run!" Darren yelled. They sprinted down the hallway, slipping on frost. The cabin shook violently, as if something enormous was climbing its exterior. They reached the back window, cracked but covered in ice. Darren grabbed a chair and smashed it. Once, twice, the third hit shattered the glass. Freezing wind slashed across their faces. The creature shrieked behind them, crawling rapidly across the ceiling. Darren pushed Ava out first, then tried pulling Lucas through, but the girl grabbed Lucas's leg and yanked him back inside. "Darren, please!" Lucas screamed, nails digging into the snowy ground as he reached out. But the creature dragged him into the dark. His screams echoed through the cabin, and then abruptly stopped. Ava sobbed, "Don't go back! Darren, don't!" He didn't. He grabbed her hand and ran into the blizzard. Behind them, the cabin lights flickered, the rocking chair started moving again, and the door slowly opened. Inviting. Waiting. Ava whispered, "What was she?" Darren didn't answer, because he realized something horrifying. There were 2 sets of small footprints in the snow now, not one, and they were following them. Story 2. The Silent Village. The snow fell relentlessly over Harrow's End, burying the crooked cottages under a thick, suffocating blanket of white. Nobody had lived there for decades, or at least that's what the maps claimed. Yet when Jonah and his friends decided to explore the abandoned village for their winter documentary, they found footprints in the snow. Fresh, human footprints. "This doesn't make sense," whispered Mara, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Harrow's End is supposed to be deserted. No one comes here for years." Jonah shrugged, but even he felt an unease prickling the back of his neck. The wind howled, carrying the faintest echo of voices, children laughing, a dog barking, and then silence. They reached the first cottage, its door hanging loosely on its hinges. Snow piled against the frame like a frozen barrier. Yet inside, the room was unnaturally warm. The smell of roasted meat lingered in the air, though the stove had been rusted shut for decades. Jonah's camera flickered as he filmed the fireplace. Shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, elongating in impossible angles. Mara shivered. "This isn't normal." Outside, the wind swirled violently, forming shapes among the snowdrifts, shapes that resembled hunched figures staring at them from the distance. Their blackened eyes glinted, almost reflecting the weak light from the overcast ski. As night fell, they realized the snowstorm had trapped them. Every direction was a wall of white. The village seemed to close in. The footprints they had followed had disappeared, and new ones appeared, smaller, childlike, heading toward the center of the village. Jonah and Mara reached the village square. The frozen fountain, cracked and covered in ice, loomed over them like a sentinel. At its base, dozens of small handprints were pressed into the snow. But when Jonah bent down to touch them, the snow felt warm, living almost. A distant bell rang. The sound was slow, hollow, and echoed through the empty streets. Jonah and Mara froze. The sound came from the church at the edge of the village. Its doors were wide open, though years of decay should have sealed them shut. "Let's check it out," Jonah whispered. Mara didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the shadows moving along the roofs, curling and twisting like black smoke. Inside the church, pews were overturned, and the altar was covered in frost. Candles were lit, though they had melted wax that hadn't existed in decades. The air smelled like old blood and cinnamon, and at the altar stood a figure, a girl, no older than 10, with hair as white as snow. Her skin was translucent, frost forming over her cheeks like a porcelain mask. Her eyes were hollow, black pits staring into Jonah's soul. She tilted her head and smiled, not a friendly smile, a smile that promised death. "Welcome," she said, voice soft, like snow settling on a grave. "We've been waiting." The floor beneath Jonah creaked. He looked down and realized the snow outside had poured in, forming puddles that moved like liquid frost. The puddles formed shapes, figures, hundreds of small human shapes pressed into the snow, crawling toward them. Mara screamed. "Run!" she shouted, but the doors slammed shut before they could move. The girl's hands stretched unnaturally, fingers bending backward, scratching the stone floor. The walls of the church shook violently, as though the building itself had a heartbeat. Jonah grabbed Mara, trying to pry the doors open, but they wouldn't budge. From the shadows, other figures emerged. Children, all pale and frostbitten, their mouths open in silent screams. They moved unnaturally, legs snapping, arms bending. Yet they walked steadily toward Jonah and Mara. The little girl at the altar raised her hand. The figures froze. Then she pointed, and the temperature dropped sharply. Frost crept over Jonah's boots, climbing his legs in seconds. He couldn't move. Mara tugged at him, but her fingers were freezing as ice spread over her hands. Their screams mixed with the wind outside, creating a sound so horrific it was impossible to distinguish human from wind. Suddenly the snow outside seemed alive. It pounded against the windows, forming shapes, faces, hands, twisted bodies, and clawed at the glass. Jonah realized the footprints they had followed weren't just human. They were alive, waiting for them to reach the village. The girl laughed, a sound like cracking ice, shattering everything. "You can't leave. No one ever leaves." Jonah tried to speak, but his voice froze mid-word. Mara tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the walls. The children closed in, their eyes empty, their mouths frozen open, some pointing at Jonah, others whispering words he couldn't understand. The floor cracked beneath them. Snow poured in like a living river, pulling at their feet. Jonah tried to pull Mara up, but she disappeared beneath the snow, her hand reaching out in terror before she was swallowed completely. Jonah's heart pounded as he struggled against the living snow, his arms breaking through the icy grip 1 second before another wave pulled him back. He looked up at the girl. Her smile had grown wider, impossible. Her eyes burned black holes, freezing his soul. And then, a whisper close to his ear. "Harrow's End never forgets. It never forgives. You belong now." The snow swallowed him entirely. The church's walls were now coated in thick frost, the candles flickering one last time before extinguishing. Outside, the village was silent again, as if nothing had happened. The storm continued, relentless and merciless. Weeks later, search teams found nothing in Harrow's End. No footprints, no signs of life. Only the snow, pristine and untouched, as if the village had never been visited at all. But every winter, locals swear they see faint footprints in the snow, small and pale, leading to the center of the abandoned village. And some say, late at night, you can hear a child's laughter, hollow and cold, echoing through the snow-covered streets. And if you ever follow the footprints, they will lead you in, and you will never leave. The Blizzard That Hunted. The blizzard came faster than any forecast had predicted. One moment the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. The next, it was a whiteout, snow swirling like a living wall of wind and ice. Mick, Elena, and their guide, Harris, were on a winter expedition through the northern ranges, documenting the frozen wilderness for a survival series. The GPS had already lost signal, and the snow was piling too fast for their pace. Visibility was near zero. "We should set up camp here," Harris shouted over the wind. "We can't keep moving in this storm." Mick scanned the area. Nothing but jagged rocks, snowdrifts, and shadows that twisted unnaturally in the blizzard. "Are you sure this is safe? The temperature just dropped 10 degrees in minutes." Harris ignored him. He was already struggling to pitch the tent. As the trio fought with stakes and ropes, the wind changed. It stopped suddenly, leaving a deafening silence. And then, A sound came. A scraping sound. Slow, measured, like metal claws dragging across ice. Elena froze. "Do you hear that?" Harris tensed. "Probably just a boulder shifting," he muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. The scraping grew louder, circling them. Mick's flashlight caught glimpses of movement through the storm. Pale, humanoid shapes, slipping through the blizzard like shadows. Their faces were featureless, smooth, frozen masks. They moved unnaturally fast, almost gliding over the snow. Elena stumbled backward into the tent, zipping it closed, but the scraping followed. The tent shuddered as if something outside had grabbed it. Mick joined her, pounding on the fabric. "Harris! Get in here!" Harris had vanished. The entrance flapped violently, and a deep, scraping howl echoed through the mountains, chilling their bones. Mick shone the flashlight outside. Footprints, dozens of them, small, pointed, leading straight toward the tent. And the snow around them seemed to move, alive, crawling slowly, forming shapes that mirrored human forms. "Elena, what are those things?" Mick whispered, his teeth chattering. "They're hunting us," she said, eyes wide with terror. "They've been waiting for someone to be stupid enough to wander into the storm." The tent shook again, harder this time. Mick grabbed the tent pole, bracing it, but the wind wasn't the culprit. Something was outside, pushing, testing. Scraping claws dug into the frozen ground, inches from their feet. Suddenly the tent ripped open from the side. Mick was pulled outside, disappearing into the white void. Elena screamed, clawing at the snow, but the creatures moved too fast. Mick's screams were muffled instantly as he vanished from sight. Elena scrambled to the remaining supplies, realizing she had no choice but to keep moving. Every step she took was against the invisible weight of the blizzard, which now seemed alive, pressing down on her, trying to suck her into the snow itself. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless. The wind howled voices, whispering promises of warmth, safety, death. Shadows flitted in the corners of her vision. She saw Mick, or what she thought was him, walking ahead, frozen, eyes black as coal, smiling a horrific grin before dissolving into snow. The blizzard didn't just trap her. It was feeding, hunting, shaping her fear into reality. At one point, she fell into a snowdrift, barely able to pull herself out. Beneath her hands, the snow wasn't soft. It was compact, icy, and human-like. It had forms, faces frozen in silent screams, hands reaching upward as if still clawing for life. Elena's fingers touched one face, and it screamed, a piercing, bone-chilling scream that froze her blood. She ran blindly, tripping over icy rocks. And then she saw it, a massive shape moving in the storm. Taller than a tree, humanoid, with a jagged, frozen body. Its face was a mask of frost, but she swore its eyes followed her. Behind it, dozens of smaller shapes mimicked every movement, hunting, circling, whispering in voices like cracking ice. Elena tripped again. The creature loomed over her. Her flashlight flickered and died. "Please, don't eat me," she begged. The creature tilted its head. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, emitting a sound that shattered snow and ice simultaneously. A scream that contained every scream it had ever consumed. Elena's vision blurred, her legs locked in terror. She tried crawling away, but the snow beneath her shifted like quicksand. Hands, frozen, jagged, human-shaped, grabbed at her. She screamed, thrashing. The creatures outside responded, converging, their forms solidifying from the blizzard itself. Then, silence. When she opened her eyes, it was dawn. The blizzard had passed. The mountain looked peaceful, untouched. No footprints, no tent, no signs of Mick or Harris. Only Elena remained, half frozen, shaking, her breath leaving clouds in the cold morning air. She tried to signal for help, but the radio was dead. GPS was gone. Every trace of technology had failed. The mountain was empty again. Elena started walking toward civilization, her mind replaying the horrors. And somewhere deep in the forest, she could feel it, the blizzard, patient, waiting. It had taught her fear. It had taught her obedience. And it would wait for the next fool who dared to wander alone. Years later, hikers would find strange human-shaped drifts of snow, perfectly sculpted, looking like people frozen mid-step. Some whispered that the shapes moved at night, stalking through storms. And those who disappeared in winter, well, nobody ever came back to tell the tale. The mountain kept its secret. It always would. Story 4. Beneath the Frozen Lake. The winter sun barely rose over the horizon, a pale disk hanging over the mountains. A thick fog clung to the frozen surface of Lake Gray Mist, turning the ice into a silvery, mirror-like expanse. No birds sang. No wind stirred. The lake seemed waiting. Ethan and Clara had come here with friends for ice fishing, ignoring the locals' warnings about gray mist. The ice looked solid, they had scoffed. It's deep winter. Nothing dangerous could happen. But the lake had its own rules. The first warning came when the ice cracked, not with a loud pop, but a subtle hum, like the groaning of some massive creature beneath the surface. Ethan felt it through his boots, a vibration that ran up his legs and into his chest. "Do you feel that?" Clara asked, stepping cautiously on the ice. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "It's just the ice settling. Nothing more." Hours passed, and the friends set up their gear. But every cast of the line, every movement, seemed to make the ice moan. Subtle cracks radiated outward in spiderweb patterns. Then they noticed the bubbles, small, dark bubbles forming beneath the surface, rising slowly as if something was breathing down there. The bubbles gathered into clusters, and beneath the ice, something began to move. At first, it was vague, a shadow shifting slowly in the depth. But then it became unmistakable. Human shapes, floating just below the frozen surface. Limbs bent in unnatural angles, faces pale and distorted, mouths frozen open in terror. Their eyes, though obscured by ice, seemed to follow Ethan and Clara. "Those are people," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Those bodies, they're alive." Ethan tried to laugh it off, but the humor died in his throat when one shape rose sharply, slamming against the ice from beneath. The ice cracked with a sharp, echoing sound. Snow from the surface sprinkled down. The friends ran, but the lake had a way of trapping them. The ice stretched further than they thought. Every step echoed with a crack that sounded like bones breaking. The air grew colder, frost forming on their faces in seconds. Then the ice shattered, not in one place, but dozens at once, as if the lake itself exhaled. Pale hands erupted from the gaps, fingers long and jagged, clawing upward. They grasped at Ethan's boots, pulling him down. He screamed, tearing free at the last second. But the ice swallowed a friend behind him with a sound like wet paper tearing. Clara grabbed him. "We have to move. It's alive." They sprinted toward the shore, but the lake wasn't done. Shapes moved faster now, almost breaking the ice intentionally. Pale, frost-bitten figures leaped, their bodies contorted, limbs snapping unnaturally as they lunged. Their mouths opened wide, and Ethan could see teeth, jagged and blackened like frozen shards of glass. One figure caught his arm. Frost spread immediately, biting through his skin, freezing, the nerves, searing him with a pain so intense it made him scream. Clara yanked him away, tearing his frozen fingers free, but the ice beneath them cracked again, spreading rapidly. Suddenly the ice around them became a mirror. In it, they saw themselves, not as they were, but twisted, frozen into grotesque forms, eyes wide in silent horror. Behind those reflections, dozens of pale faces pressed against the ice from below, mouths opening and closing, trying to scream. Ethan realized the truth. The lake wasn't just trapping them. It was showing them what they would become. The surface shifted again, snow swirling violently. Figures started emerging. Not just humans, but animals too. Deer, wolves, even a bear. All frozen pale, eyes black and lifeless, yet moving with unnatural purpose. They weren't trying to kill. They were hunting, dragging the living into the ice to join the dead. Clara spotted a small boat half buried in snow near the far shore. There! Maybe we can row to safety! They ran, dodging grasping hands, slipping on ice cracks, narrowly avoiding being dragged under. They jumped into the boat. The ice groaned and cracked all around, waves of freezing water pushing the boat violently. As they rowed, shadows appeared beneath them, pale hands reaching through cracks, clawing, scraping. The lake screamed, a sound like thousands of voices trapped beneath ice, shouting in unison, begging for release. Ethan looked down and saw a face stare back at him from the water, frozen, pale, mouth open wide. It was his own reflection, distorted, screaming. And then the hands grabbed the boat. They rowed faster, every stroke a battle against the unnatural force beneath. But the lake wasn't letting them go. Shapes of the dead surged upward, climbing onto the boat, their icy bodies freezing anything they touched. Clara hit one with an oar. It shattered instantly, but more rose in its place. Panic overtook them. The sky darkened, clouds spiraling overhead like a vortex, snow raining down in sharp, icy shards. One final surge, and the boat capsized. Ethan and Clara plunged into the freezing water. The cold was unbearable, but they fought, swimming toward a small patch of snow-covered rock. Shapes followed, dragging themselves over the ice, climbing after them. Ethan reached the rock first, coughing, freezing, gasping. Clara surfaced beside him, her eyes wide in horror. Around them, the lake was alive with movement, bodies, faces, claws, mouths, all frozen yet animated, hunting. A massive shadow loomed beneath the water. A pale humanoid figure, at least twice the size of a man, its face obscured by frost. It stared at them with hollow black eyes, and the water around it bubbled as if boiling. It opened its mouth, and they heard the screams of all the drowned, trapped souls beneath the ice. Ethan grabbed Clara's hand. "We run when it sinks," he yelled. The shadow lunged. They dove under the snow-covered rock and ran, along the shore, sprinting blindly. Every step, they saw the reflections of their own frozen faces in the ice. Every crack and groan of the lake sounded like the snapping of bones. Hours later, they stumbled onto the forest edge. Behind them, Lake Greymist was calm again, mirroring the gray sky, completely still. Not a ripple, not a sound. Ethan and Clara never spoke of what they saw, and they never returned to the lake. But locals whispered that anyone who ventures onto Greymist in winter never comes back. Some say the lake collects them slowly, holding them beneath the ice, freezing them alive until they are part of its army of shadows. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, hikers swear they see pale hands breaking through the frozen surface, reaching for anyone who dares cross the lake, and hear faint whispers, "Join us beneath the ice forever." Story 5. The Howling Woods. The forest was silent, but for the snow crunching under Elena and Tom's boots. They had wandered off the main trail, chasing a rare photograph opportunity of a winter wolf. The trees loomed tall, skeletal in the snow, their branches clawing at the gray sky. Elena paused, shivering. "I don't like this. It feels wrong, too quiet." Tom laughed nervously. "It's a forest in winter. Quiet is normal." But it wasn't. A sound rose from deep within the trees. A low growl, stretching and bending in impossible ways. It was a single note, but it carried through the forest like an echo that didn't obey physics. The hairs on Elena's arms stood up. Suddenly, something moved between the trees, too fast to be a deer, too silent to be a human. A shadow flitted along the snow, dissolving and reappearing closer each time they blinked. "Did you see that?" Elena whispered. Tom strained his eyes. "Probably just a fox." The shadow emerged fully, revealing itself. Not a fox, not any animal they knew. It was humanoid, but taller, grotesque. Its limbs were elongated, bones jutting through skin, stretched tight. Its face was narrow, no eyes, only a gaping mouth that constantly opened and closed, emitting a high-pitched, chilling howl that froze their blood. The creature moved toward them, gliding silently over the snow. Its claws scraped trees as it passed, leaving blackened streaks against the white trunks. Tom grabbed Elena's hand. "Run!" They sprinted, snow spraying around them, lungs burning. But the forest seemed endless. Every tree they passed looked the same. Every direction led deeper into the maze. And always, behind them, the howl followed, closer, more desperate. Branches whipped their faces, snow fell in thick sheets, and the creature never broke stride. Its head tilted unnaturally as it listened, hunting with senses beyond human comprehension. Then came the smaller ones. Dozens of them emerged from the woods, copies of the larger creature, but faster, thinner, teeth jagged and black as frozen tar. They surrounded the couple in seconds, moving so fast they almost blurred. Elena screamed, swinging her camera as a weapon. It made no difference. One small creature leapt at her, clawing through her jacket, freezing her shoulder instantly. The cold burned like fire. She yanked free, only to see Tom struggle with another. The larger creature advanced. Its howl had changed. No longer a call, but a song, a melody that twisted the mind. Elena felt her vision blur, colors melting into black and white. She tried to speak, tried to scream, but the forest swallowed her voice. Then from the shadows, she saw the bodies of previous victims, hikers, hunters, photographers, hanging from the trees like grotesque ornaments. Their faces were frozen in eternal terror, limbs bent in impossible angles, skin pale and cracked from frostbite that seemed alive. The large creature extended its hand. Fingers were long, frozen, tipped with ice like knives. It reached for Elena. She stumbled backward, falling into a hollow under a tree. Tom screamed behind her as the creature's claw grazed him, cutting through his jacket and freezing his flesh in seconds. Elena crawled, her hands bloody from snow and bark. She could feel the creature's presence closing in, a wave of icy wind emanating from their bodies. They were not alive, not dead. Something older, hungrier, born of the forest itself, frozen in winter, yet moving, hunting, consuming fear as sustenance. Through a break in the trees, she saw the road, a faint light of a passing car. Salvation. She screamed, waving her arms. The light flared. But when she turned, the creatures were between her and the road. The largest creature crouched, its mouth opening impossibly wide, a shriek tearing through her mind. She collapsed, clutching the snow, her body trembling uncontrollably. Around her, shadows thickened, snow crawling toward her like living hands. Suddenly the shriek stopped. Silence again. Too sudden. Too absolute. Elena dared to open her eyes. The creatures were gone. The forest calm. Snow falling gently, covering the marks of struggle. But she was alone. She stumbled to the road. The car passed, headlights cutting through the gray. She tried to run toward it, but when she looked back at the forest, the largest creature reappeared. Not on the ground, but in the sky. It hovered above the treetops, pale and translucent, howling into the wind. Its smaller forms surrounded it, forming a circle. Elena realized with horror that they weren't chasing her anymore. They were waiting, patient, calculating, hungry. Years later, hikers in the same area report strange sightings in winter. Pale, elongated figures among the snow, moving with impossible speed, howls that seem to echo in your mind, and a chilling realization that the forest watches, always. Some who wandered too far into the howling woods in winter never returned, and those who survived always said the same thing. If you hear the howl, stop moving. Don't breathe too loud. The forest hunts, and it never forgets. Story 6. The Frozen Hostel. The winter break at Alderwood Academy had always been quiet, but this year's storm made the boarding school feel like a tomb. Students had gone home, leaving only a handful of boarders and 2 staff members, Mr. Hargrove, the night supervisor, and the cook, Mrs. Layton. Jade and her friends, Nina, Caleb, and Marcus, had decided to stay back, despite the storm, citing exams and projects. The Academy's oldest hostel, the North Wing, had been abandoned for decades due to a fire. The corridors were said to be haunted, but the group scoffed at the stories. "It's just stories," Caleb said, brushing snow from his jacket as he walked through the empty corridors. "No one's been hurt here for years." Yet the building groaned in the winter wind, doors creaking, windows rattling, and the old radiator systems banging as though the building itself were breathing. The first sign that something was wrong came at dinner. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for seconds. When they returned, Marcus swore he saw someone sitting at the end of the long dining table, a figure of a student in an old uniform, pale, with dark, hollow eyes. When he blinked, it was gone. "Nah, it's just a shadow," Jade said, but unease crept through her chest. Later that night they gathered in the common room to study. Outside, the storm raged, turning the academy into an island of white. Suddenly the radiator clanged violently, and the windows froze over with thick frost from the inside. The temperature plummeted unnaturally fast. Breath fogged instantly, even indoors. A whisper floated through the room, soft, almost melodic. "Leave before the ice takes you." Nina shivered. "Did you hear that?" Caleb laughed nervously, but when he glanced at the hallway, he froze. Footsteps, slow, dragging, echoing unnaturally on the polished floors, came from the direction of the North Wing. No one was there. The group decided to check. Torchlights cut through the darkness as they moved down the hall. The North Wing doors were locked. yet frost seeped from beneath the edges. The whispers grew louder. "It's cold! So cold! Join us!" Jade's hand trembled as she pushed the door. It opened without resistance. Inside, the hallway was coated in ice, thick and slippery, snow piling in from broken windows. Along the corridor were rows of beds, all frozen over, each covered in frost that looked disturbingly like human skin. Then, a soft creak. The bed at the far end shifted slightly. A hand, frozen, pale, and cracked, emerged from the frost. It gripped the bedpost and pulled, dragging a figure forward. A boy, thin, his face frozen in terror, eyes wide and black, emerged slowly from the frost. His uniform was tattered, frost covering him from head to toe. Jade screamed. The figure lunged. It moved faster than humanly possible, its frost-covered fingers tearing at clothes and skin. Alike. Marcus grabbed her, yanking her back, but Nina was already frozen in place, staring at the next bed. More figures emerged, pale, thin, hollow-eyed, moving as if the frost itself animated them. The whispers filled the hallway, voices layered over each other. Warm, inside, forever. The group ran, but the building twisted around them. Corridors stretched impossibly long, doors leading to rooms that shouldn't exist. The frost seemed alive, crawling along the walls and ceilings. They were trapped inside a labyrinth of ice and shadows. One figure caught Marcus's ankle, dragging him backward. Frost erupted from its hands, freezing him instantly. He screamed, limbs locking in unnatural positions, turning slowly into a statue of ice. Jade and the others barely made it to the main staircase, but it had frozen solid. Each step cracked dangerously under their weight. The building itself seemed to pulse with frost, guiding the creatures toward them. At the top floor, they found the old library. It was untouched by the frost, but the whispering voices followed them, louder now, almost chanting. The library doors slammed shut. From the corners of the room, figures began to emerge from shadows. Students from decades past, frozen in life, eyes black, mouths open in silent screams. Their fingers stretched, ice forming jagged nails. They reached for Jade and Nina. Desperation took hold. Jade grabbed a heavy book and swung at the nearest figure, shattering its icy face into shards. The shards exploded into mist, but others kept coming. The figures weren't just alive, they were hungry. They weren't human. Nina pulled Jade toward the windows. One pane was cracked, just enough to squeeze through. Outside, the storm raged, but it was freedom compared to the frozen horror inside. They leapt into the snow. Frost burned their skin instantly. Behind them, the library doors exploded outward, and dozens of figures burst into the courtyard, their hollow eyes scanning the horizon. The north wing shuddered violently, ice cracking and collapsing. Jade and Nina ran blindly. The storm swallowing them. When they finally reached the main gate, the academy behind them was silent. No doors, no lights, no sign of the frozen horrors. The storm had calmed as suddenly as it began. Weeks later, investigators found no evidence of the north wing ever being inhabited. No trace of Marcus, no footprints beyond the courtyard. Only Jade and Nina returned, scarred, silent, and shaken. They never spoke of what they had seen again, but locals whispered that in winter you could sometimes hear footsteps on the empty floors of Alderwood Academy. And if you dared to stay behind in the north wing, the frost would come for you, whispering your name, pulling you into the frozen eternity. Because once you enter, the ice remembers, and it never lets go. Story 7, The Summit That Never Ends. The wind tore across the peaks like a living predator, whipping snow into blinding sheets. Jake, Laura, and Simon had been climbing the northern ridge of Mount Frostville for hours, their breaths steaming in the icy air. The GPS was dead, the compass spinning erratically, and the storm had come on faster than anyone expected. "This can't be right," Simon muttered, staring at the jagged landscape. "We should have reached the lodge by now." Laura shook her head. "It's the storm. Visibility's awful. We'll find it." But the lodge wasn't there. Through the blizzard, a structure appeared. A lone cabin, small, dark, and leaning under the weight of snow. A faint glow emanated from a single window, warm and inviting in a way that made their frozen limbs ache. "Thank God," Jake whispered. "Let's get inside." The cabin door creaked as they pushed it open. Warmth rushed out, almost intoxicating. Snowflakes melted against the floorboards, but something felt off. The wood smelled older than it should, a mix of smoke, rot, and something metallic beneath. The interior was small, with a single fireplace, a table, and 2 beds. Yet the cabin felt alive, as if it were breathing. Shadows shifted in the corners. The warmth wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. They huddled near the fire, removing their wet boots and jackets. The storm outside raged, but inside, a soft hum filled the air. Low, vibrating, almost like whispers. Then came the scratching. At first, faint, tiny fingernails against the walls, then louder, rhythmic, as if someone, or something, was circling the cabin. Laura froze. "Did you hear that?" Jake laughed nervously. "Probably branches, the wind." But the scratching continued, and then came the knock, slow, deliberate, on the front door. Simon tried the door. It was locked. From the inside. They hadn't touched it. The knock became a pounding, and a voice, deep, distorted, yet human, called from outside, "Let us in!" Panic surged. They backed away, eyes searching the small room. Then they noticed the walls, faint handprints, small, pale, clawing through the wood. They weren't human. Before they could react, the fire flickered violently and went out. Darkness swallowed them. A cold, unnatural frost spread from the corners, creeping toward the fireplace, across the floor, along the walls. And then they saw them. Shadows, pale and twisted, crawling across the floor like living frost. They moved silently but fast, their eyes black voids reflecting nothing but hunger. Jake grabbed a log. "We have to fight them!" The shadows recoiled from the wood's warmth, but only briefly. They surged again, melting into snow mist, reforming near their ankles, wrapping icy fingers around their limbs. Laura screamed as one shadow clawed her shoulder, freezing the flesh instantly. Simon tried to pull her free, but the frost spread, rapidly locking her muscles. The shadows hissed, a sound like ice cracking in a grave. Jake swung the log at the nearest shadow. It shattered, leaving only icy dust. But another took its place. The cabin seemed endless now, walls stretching, floorboards bending, corners opening into voids of white and black. A voice whispered from the fireplace, "The summit is ours, and so are you." The shadows grew taller, merging, forming a humanoid figure. Its head was too large, jaw unhinged, teeth black as obsidian. Frost covered its body like armor. The cabin shook as it approached, and a deep hum resonated through the floor, vibrating their bones. Simon screamed, "We have to get out!" They ran for the door, but as they touched the handle, Frost exploded across their hands, freezing them in place. The figure loomed over them, its breath icy, freezing the air. Every step it took left frost cracking along the floorboards, spreading rapidly like wildfire. Laura screamed, struggling to break free, but the frost consumed her first. Her skin turned blue-white, cracking under the icy pressure. She vanished into the spreading frost, leaving only a whisper of her final scream. Jake and Simon tried one final push, using their body weight to break free. They burst into the blizzard outside. The cabin, however, didn't remain behind. It twisted, growing taller, its roof jagged and black. Windows glowed with malevolent warmth. The snow around it swirled violently, forming humanoid shapes that advanced silently, reaching, grasping. They ran down the mountain, barely seeing through the storm. Behind them, the shadows moved in the snow, hundreds of pale, frost-bitten figures. The whispers followed, echoing in the wind. The summit belongs to us. Join us in the frost, forever. Hours, or maybe minutes later, they reached a pass. The storm cleared slightly. Behind them, the mountain and cabin were gone, as if they had never existed. Only the snow remained, pristine, untouched, and silent. Jake looked at Simon. Did that really happen? Simon didn't answer. His hands were numb, his breath ragged, and in the snow behind them, faint footprints appeared, small, pale, and human-shaped. They didn't belong to them. Years later, climbers in the northern ridge of Mount Frostvale report strange disappearances during winter. Some others speak of a cabin appearing suddenly in the blizzard, inviting, warm, alive. Those who enter are never seen again. Others hear whispers in the wind, warning travelers to stay away. And if you climb too high during a winter storm, some say you might see pale, twisted shadows moving among the peaks, watching, waiting for the next foolish soul to reach the summit. Because some mountains do not forgive, some cabins are alive, and winter remembers everything. Story 8. The Highway That Shouldn't Exist. The highway stretched endlessly into the white haze, snow covering the asphalt like a blank sheet. Cars were few, far between, and the yellow lines beneath were barely visible. Mark, Lily, and Dan were on a winter road trip, heading home from a photography assignment in the mountains. The GPS flickered, then died entirely, leaving them navigating by memory and instinct. "This doesn't look familiar," Lily said, her voice tight. "We should have passed the old rest stop by now." Mark frowned, gripping the steering wheel. The storm slowed traffic. Maybe we missed it. But as hours passed, the landscape grew stranger. Trees became twisted, snowdrifts unnaturally high, shadows forming among the white mounds, as if something moved beneath the snow. Dan pointed ahead. "Is that a truck? On our side of the road?" A large, rusted vehicle loomed in the distance. Its headlights flickered erratically. As they drew closer, it didn't seem real. Too wide, too low, edges blurred like it was moving in and out of reality. The truck's grill seemed to pulse, breathing, and for a moment they swore they saw faces pressed against the windows. "Keep driving," Mark urged. But as they passed, a shadow leapt across the road. A figure, pale, tall, impossibly thin, stood directly in front of them. Mark swerved violently, snow spraying, tires skidding. The figure disappeared, but the snow where it had stood seemed alive, writhing like frozen tendrils. The storm intensified. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Headlights reflected off the snow in blinding sheets. And the road. It began to change. Intersections that shouldn't exist appeared. Side roads that weren't on the map branched off into darkness. Every turn led them back to the same stretch of highway, as if the road itself were a trap. Lily screamed as something tapped the car window. Small, pale hands pressed against the glass from the snowbank outside. When Mark rolled the window down, the hands vanished instantly. Then came the whispers, soft at first, indistinct, but gradually words became audible. "Turn around. Follow us. Join us." Dan froze. "This isn't real. We're hallucinating." But Mark knew better. He could feel the air grow colder, unnatural, freezing the inside of the car. Breath crystallized in the cabin. The radio crackled, but no sound came. Only whispers layered over static. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the road, walking slowly toward them. No headlights, no sound, just pale skin, black voids for eyes, mouth stretching in an endless scream. Mark swerved again, narrowly missing it, but the car slid into a snowdrift. They were trapped. The highway now seemed endless, stretching into a white void. Every attempt to turn off the road led them back. Shadows formed along the edges of the road, hundreds of pale figures crawling from snowdrifts, moving impossibly fast, surrounding them. Their faces were expressionless, hollow-eyed, and yet radiated an intent that chilled the soul. One figure pressed its face against the windshield, mouth opening impossibly wide, emitting a shrill, frozen scream. The sound was unbearable, resonating through their bones. Another tapped on the roof of the car, and frost spread across it instantly, freezing the metal under their fingers. Lily turned to Mark. "We have to keep moving." Mark tried, but the steering wheel wouldn't respond properly. Every direction he turned, the road twisted unnaturally. The highway wasn't a highway anymore. It was alive, shifting, guiding them into the center of something larger, something waiting. Then, the truck returned. Not ahead this time, but behind them. Its headlights brighter, reflecting impossible eyes in the snow. The engine made no sound, yet they could feel it approaching, vibrating the car through the frozen asphalt. Dan screamed as snow formed inside the cabin, climbing their legs, freezing skin instantly. The hands outside the windows returned, dragging down, pulling at doors, mirrors, and limbs. The car rocked violently, as if trying to free itself from an invisible grip. A voice whispered directly into Mark's mind. "You can't leave. The highway keeps what it takes." The shadows pressed closer, their numbers growing. Figures emerged from the snowbanks, human shapes twisted and broken, some crawling, some gliding. Frost erupted from their fingers, freezing the car windows and mirrors, obscuring any view. Mark made a desperate decision. He slammed the gear shift into reverse and floored the accelerator. The car lurched backward into the white void. For a moment, it seemed to work. The shadows recoiled slightly. But the road shifted again, bending, curving impossibly, bringing them forward no matter how far they drove backward. They screamed in unison. The car shook violently as frost spread over every surface. Faces appeared in the windshield, screaming silently, eyes black and endless, hands clawed at the doors, windows, and roof. Finally, the car skidded into a stand of trees, snow piled high on every side. The engine, cut out. Silence fell. They looked up, and the highway was gone. In its place, only snow and twisted trees. No road, no signs, no tire tracks. Nothing. For hours they wandered, trying to find civilization. But the snowstorm had trapped them in a maze. The shadows didn't move, but their eyes followed. The whispers returned at night. closer now, almost audible. The highway waits. It always waits. You belong. When a search party eventually found the abandoned car weeks later, the snow had already erased all traces of tracks. Inside the car, frost had preserved the seats, steering wheel, and dash, but no sign of Mark, Lily, or Dan. Only the radio, crackling faintly, emitted a whisper. Join us, on the road, forever. Travelers who venture out on isolated highways in winter, sometimes, report pale figures moving in the snow, inexplicable lights appearing in the distance, and the feeling of being watched. Few realize that some roads are not just paved. They are alive, waiting to consume those foolish enough to travel them in the storm. Because once you enter, the highway never lets go. Story 9. The Frozen Station. The Arctic night was endless. Outside, the aurora borealis danced across the sky, painting the polar desert with eerie colors. But inside the Halcyon Research Station, the world was even colder. Dr. Elena Voss and her team had been stationed here for 3 months, studying glacial shifts and climate anomalies. Supplies were low, communication intermittent, and the storm outside had trapped them in the station for days. The first anomaly appeared as a simple malfunction. The sensors detecting temperature drops suddenly showed readings far below the region's historical lows. Inside the station, it was freezing, even in heated rooms. Frost formed instantly on walls, ceilings, and instruments. "We've never had temperatures this low," Dr. Voss murmured, rubbing her arms. "Even for this latitude." Late that night, an alarm echoed through the corridors. Motion sensors outside the station detected movement in the snow, but cameras showed nothing. When the team stepped outside, the snow appeared untouched, pristine. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like the wind, but gradually forming words. "Join the cold forever." Corporal Anders shivered. "It's probably the wind, or hallucinations." But hallucinations don't leave footprints. Fresh tracks appeared in the snow outside, human-shaped, too small to belong to any adult. The team followed them with flashlights, leads that twisted into strange patterns, circling the station endlessly. It was as if the snow itself were alive, reshaping to trap them in place. By the next morning, the anomalies grew worse. Equipment failed mysteriously, metal froze so fast it cracked, and frost covered the walls like living veins. Shadows moved where no light should reach. In the mess hall, trays and chairs shifted on their own, forming small piles of frozen figures, bodies of past explorers, preserved in ice, or so it seemed. Then, one of the junior researchers disappeared. Dr. Voss had left him checking instruments in the northern wing. When she went to find him, she saw only frost-covered footprints leading into a wall. The wall itself seemed to breathe, frost rippling like water. A scream echoed from behind the wall, but when she approached, there was nothing. Only a thin layer of frost covering the metal surface. The team decided to evacuate. All vehicles and drones outside were frozen solid, engines shattered, as if ice had entered the machinery itself. The storm intensified. The station seemed to shift subtly. The hallways stretched. The doors were slightly displaced, creating an endless maze. At night, the figures appeared, pale, emaciated humanoids, frozen yet moving, emerging from the frost. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. They walked along the walls, ceilings, and floors with unnatural speed. Dr. Voss realized the truth. The station itself was alive. It had absorbed the cold, the wind, the snow, and the fears of the explorers. It created figures from the frost, animating the dead and the lost to trap the living. Corporal Anders confronted one figure. Its hand reached toward him, freezing his jacket instantly. When he tried to recoil, frost spread along his skin, searing painfully. He vanished, as if swallowed by the station itself. Elena ran through the halls, the whispers following her. The cold remembers. The frost collects. Join us. She found the central hub, computers flickering, screens showing impossible shapes moving outside, forms that weren't entirely human, some appearing partially transparent, some entirely composed of ice. They were all converging on the station. Desperation drove her to the emergency pod. The hatch opened with a hiss. She climbed in, activating the thrusters. Outside, the station seemed to pulse like a heart, shadows moving in rhythm with some unnaturally. The thrusters fired, but the station didn't recede. Instead, the snow around it rose in columns, forming humanoid shapes that reached for the pod. Elena felt frost forming on the hatch, freezing her fingers to the controls. A figure appeared directly in front of the pod, larger than any human, composed entirely of ice and shadow, its mouth a black void. It leaned in, and she could hear all the screams it had absorbed echoing inside its body. Elena pushed the thrusters to full. The pod lifted slightly, but the frost continued to spread. Shapes climbed the pod's sides, freezing the metal, the seals, her suit. She screamed into her comms, but only static answered. The whispers became a chorus. You belong to the frost forever. Hours, or maybe seconds, later, the pod broke free from the immediate area. The station was a distant shape now, but in the ice fields, the shadows moved endlessly, waiting. The storm persisted. Even from a safe distance, she could see frost forming in unnatural shapes, humanoids frozen mid-step, scattered across the tundra like a frozen army. Elena realized the harsh truth. The Halcyon station did not just trap explorers. It converted them into something else, shadows of the frost, animated eternally, joining the ice and storm. The cold remembered everything it consumed. The pod continued drifting over the barren ice. On radar, she saw other structures, research stations, cabins, half-buried, emitting faint pulses of warmth. She knew the station was not unique. The Arctic was alive, watching, collecting. Someday, she knew, she might slip, fall, and vanish into the frost. And if she did, the station, or something like it, would remember her. Her body would move, her screams trapped in ice, joining the chorus that awaited every lost traveler in the polar night. Elena recorded her final log. The storm is not just weather. The frost is alive. Do not come here. The ice watches. The station waits. And the cold never forgets. Beyond her pod's window, the aurora borealis danced, green and purple lights rippling across the frozen wasteland. But in the distance, shadows moved, tiny humanoids climbing the snow dunes, waiting for the next arrival. Somewhere far below, the Halcyon station pulsed in the darkness, alive and hungry, and winter remembered.